How many of you have had a learning experience where you thought, wow, this is great stuff. I can't wait to do something with all this new learning. But then the learning ends and you forget the bulk of what you learned. And unfortunately, you don't use it in the future. This is actually a pretty common experience and one that, as someone who develops professional learning, I actually would like to avoid. The reason that this happens is because it's challenging to move newly learned information from our working memory into our long-term memory. Much of what we learn actually gets lost if we don't actually work to retain it. And research shows that after just one day, you'll lose up to 20% of that new learning that you had. In this mixed methods research study that I did, I examined the design of professional learning for school principals, and I researched whether there are ways to increase the retention of their learning and impact that it had on the instructional leadership that they developed in their schools. Recent research shows that principals are only second to teachers in their impacts on student achievement. These leaders have really shifted their focus in the past few decades to being instructional leaders who help to really determine what's happening in their classrooms in their schools. And they're not just managerial in their roles anymore. However, because of this new role as an instructional leader, they're experiencing increased demands in their job, which means they can spend 60 to 70-hour work weeks that drain their cognitive resources for thinking and learning. Paired with the fact that they only spend 2% of their time on their own professional development, according to research, is really critical to have learning experiences that they can retain and can be impactful in their work in their schools. In my study, I looked at whether there are ways that the brain learns best that could be included in professional development to help these principals move their learning into their long-term memory and have a greater impact. My study examined professional development that embedded metacognitive practices that help the principals to become aware of their learning and connect to their role in their job as an instructional leader in their schools. And they used retrieval practice to help to cue them to recall the previous learning that they had and strengthen and connect to that new learning. The results of my study showed that retrieval practice benefited the retention of their principals' learning. Principals were able to recall almost 50% of information that they had learned over 6 months ago. And qualitative research showed that several had incorporated their learning into feedback that they were giving to teachers. And they were modeling some of the practices that they learned in their learning for their own staff. Finally, some had used their learning to develop their own school-wide professional learning plan for their school modeled after the learning that they had done. Because metacognition and retrieval practice require no extra cost to include in professional development and aid in the retention and application of learning, their inclusion into professional development for any learning is worth considering in order to harness the power of how the brain learns. Thank you.